Hello, Raleigh. This is citizen reporter Robert Courts coming to you from the Your Backyard Raleigh News Network. And I'm very excited today to have my second in-depth interview with at-large Raleigh City Council candidate, Mr. Reeves Peeler. Mr. Peeler, thank you for joining me again.
Thank you for having me, Robert.
Well, it is my pleasure. I enjoy lifting the voices and the work of true engaged citizens, and especially this time of year for someone willing to run for office and make that sacrifice. And Mr. Peeler, I think Raleigh should start with saying thank you for putting yourself out on the line like this.
Well, thank you for having me here to talk about this again. I love coming on YBY. I wish we had more citizens in Raleigh doing investigative reporting, doing interviews on local government, digging into issues in local government like you do. So we need more of an atmosphere of that.
Well, I appreciate it. Everyone's welcome to lift the voices. I wish the actual news agencies we had did this stuff so that I didn't have to. But in that gap, I am happy to do what I can. And as I think everyone in my audience knows, that when I look at a candidate, I'm looking for three things, and I would like to discuss how these apply to you. And the first is I get a little tired of people running for office that have had absolutely no city experience or advocacy or volunteer experience. But you, Mr. Peeler, have a great depth of that. Could you speak to that for just a minute, please?
Yeah, for sure. For one, I grew up in Raleigh. I was born and raised here, went to Lacey, Martin, Broughton, all public schools, graduated from NC State. And I started working in agriculture because I studied ag economics at State. Go back. And, I followed politics, and I think, I had a slightly liberal outlook maybe during my formative years, but I did not dig into local politics when I was in my early 20s, mid 20s. I got a job actually on the West Coast and moved out there for several years. So I lived away from Raleigh for about 7 years. And, during that time, as you know, it's very difficult, expensive to live on the West Coast. Mm-hmm. And I went through a number of kind of crazy, tumultuous housing situations, faced some illegal eviction attempts, and was relying on rent control apartments to be able to stay in cities on the West Coast where my jobs were. And that was really formative for me. That was those experiences what first led me to dig into municipal politics. For a little while, I was living in San Francisco, and I had to fight an eviction. So I had to go and look what tenant protections are provided to me. What rights do I have? What rights does my landlord have? And then that kind of led me to looking into what zoning and planning were, because the two were very interconnected, and learned a lot about how affordable housing is funded, and a lot about how local elections work and how important they were, and how planning your city, whether it's, a place like New York or San Francisco or Raleigh, or a place like, Oxford or Smithfield, North Carolina, like small towns, they all have a lot in common, actually, when it comes to planning. The outcomes might look different, but they have a lot in common with how they have to work and how citizens have to be engaged and know those things and contribute often their free time and free knowledge to make that happen. So that was the biggest thing. Yeah. And I think, during those years, I had volunteered some for a tenant defense attorney, an awesome, great community leader in the Bay Area named Dean Preston. And he ran for city supervisor, which is their equivalent of city council. And he did not win the first time, but he won his subsequent 2 elections. And the really cool thing out there, they have citizen ballot measures, which is the thing I really wish we had here in North Carolina. But Dean wrote a number of ballot measures about funding affordable housing, primarily through taxing big corporations locally and taxing real estate transfers, luxury real estate transfers over like $5 million to fund that housing, which is something 2 things we badly need, in my opinion, here in Raleigh. And then the other things were having to do with providing a free defense attorney by right for those facing eviction, amongst other things, to, give homeless people more rights when they're evicted, make sure people are not, brutalized, criminalized when they're being forced to sleep outside. So those things were really important to me. And I learned a lot seeing how those issues had to be engaged with through all stakeholders in a city, and how they work their way through the city's bureaucracy to eventually become policy.
Well, I really like that. What started as your need, right? You're like, hey, I'm in this situation, and I need to act. I need to educate myself as a citizen. But then that really was the spark that got you engaged on the West Coast to really learn and support local government and local candidates. But it certainly didn't stop there, Candidate Peeler. You did move back to Raleigh, and you have grown even more in depth and had other engagement opportunities. Would you speak a little bit to that, please?
Definitely. Well, I moved back to Raleigh in early 2021 because I had a variety of different opportunities to organize here, and I really wanted to do organizing back in my home state, community organizing, election organizing. And I worked on some local Wake County campaigns. And then probably the most informative thing I did was I went to work for a group called Down Home North Carolina. So they're a nonprofit that does both community political projects in terms of pressuring your local council or commission to fund things that are good for working class people, whether that be housing, parks, et cetera. And they also did election field campaigns. So I worked heavily in Johnston and Granville County doing that. And so I've just a quick sum up of some of the wins and cool projects we did there. We got a historic park in downtown Oxford refurbished and rebuilt, got basketball courts built there, and the community now has access to a public space that it didn't have. An awesome team of volunteers in Oxford helped get that done. And then we also elected Oxford's first Black mayor, a guy named Guillermo Nurse. Granville County's first Black sheriff, which, as you know, Granville County's had a lot of drama in the last 5 years with their local law enforcement. And we also did a public transportation campaign to get a 4 countywide regional public transit program called CARTS, K-A-R-T-S, to try to push to get that more funding, especially across Granville County. So that taught me a lot about how county and municipal governments interact, the federal grants they get, what they're limited in doing by the General Assembly, and also just how they can spend their budgets better locally and how political coalitions can be built to make that pressure to spend their budgets better. Also during that time, there was an opening on the Raleigh Planning Commission.
Nice.
And again, I had learned planning kind of in this, more informal way, which was great because I think I learned some great nitty gritty stuff by kind of having a little more hands in the dirt, learning curve. And yeah, so I was nominated originally for a vacancy on the Planning Commission in January of 2023. And that person actually decided they wanted to stay on for a 3rd term. So I did not get appointed in January 23, but then another one came up in May of 23. And that person, I believe, had termed out. And, what you have to do, you have to go lobby the counselors to get them to approve you, which I did, and got voted on to the Planning Commission in May of 23. And it's been amazing. Being on the Raleigh Planning Commission has allowed me to contribute in ways that I thought I never could to the city and make my voice heard. But also I have learned so much. I mean, that saying, you don't know what you don't know, but that was, I thought I knew a lot about planning when I started that. And I'd say every meeting, everyone on there, even people with 30, 40 years of experience, professional experience in that field, we'll debrief after them. And they're often like, yeah, I am learning by the day in a city like Raleigh that's changing so fast. So, yeah.
Well, Mr. Peeler, I've noticed that some of your opponents feel that simply a law degree makes them eligible to serve. And I wholeheartedly disagree. Your experience, starting with being a servant first, one who is a volunteer, one who then makes their career part of servicing, and has a 10+ year track record of being a servant before being a leader, I believe is a much better training ground for the city council than being an attorney. So I truly believe that experience is going to help you greatly when you sit at the dais. So that is a remarkable history.
Thank you. It's, everyone brings something different to council. I agree with you that I think public service and you know, really pushing for things that are going to help the working class and middle class people that make the city actually go round. I think that is what prepares a candidate the best to do the best they can do. Obviously, I'm biased because I have my platform. And by now you've heard me talk about how important it is to plan a city for working class people. Most people have. So I'm biased in that, but I do truly think that objectively that is what we need. You know, the channels and coalitions and all this wealthy stakeholders of a city, they're going to be able to take care of themselves. And that's true for every level of government in this country. Those levels are going to be able to take care of themselves. People who are working in nursing jobs, teaching jobs, service industry, our sanitation workers, our firefighters, they are the ones that need to be at the table and in positions of power and have advocacy on their side and leverage on their side to be able to plan things and hold leaders accountable. So I'm happy to be running on that. I'm proud to be running on that. And I think my background, and I'll also shout out real quick, both my parents, you know, my mom is a mediator and my dad spent almost 30 years in the North Carolina Labor Department. He also worked in the North Carolina State Department, but he was a public servant as well. And, you know, did a lot with OSHA on workplace safety regulations, particularly farm worker safety regulations. And both my parents really instilled in me that you got to serve your community, you got to give back, and regular people that are making the world go round are the ones that really need a seat at the table. So,
well, candidate Peeler, you're all that and a bag of chips. And for me, the bag of chips comes to, I truly believe that citizen engagement is the cornerstone of good governance. Mm-hmm. And one of your opponents actively voted on February 2nd of 2020 to dismantle the CACs, which was Raleigh's Citizen Advisory Councils. But you have a strong and committed commitment to citizen engagement. Would you speak just a moment toward that, please?
Yeah, citizen engagement, it's kind of a term like affordable housing in that every candidate will tell you it's important to them. But you really have to dig into the details. The devil's truly in the details into how candidates actually feel about that. I was really disappointed to see CACs taken apart back in 2020. I'm glad they are slowly being reinstated. And I think the city does have a plan. I do think our current council has, because of the pressure they felt from citizens like you and me and others, they are slowly putting those back into place. I think CACs need to be better than they were prior to 2022. Yeah. I think there's ways to improve them. But yeah, I want to lift up a few things with citizen engagement. I think, you know, having been someone who led teams of door knockers for a living, which is what I did with Down Home and some projects in California, the best way to engage with people is at their door. Mm-hmm. And that takes people, it takes money to do. It's expensive to run door knocking operations. But something I've brought up at Planning Commission a lot is I would love to see the city of Raleigh really invest in knocking doors, engaging with people at their door. Right now, for say a massive street change or rezoning, the most we would really see the city do, and again, the city has limited resources, so we'd have to be careful how we did this, but the most you'll see the city do is send out a mailer or two. They might hold they will hold a community meeting, sometimes 2 community meetings. And often they'll put out a yard sign for a rezoning saying tenant notice. Now, to be clear, I'm glad they do those things. Some towns, municipalities don't do anything like that. But we do need to do more. And people who work night shifts, multiple jobs, single parents, often still are not able to attend community meetings. And people who are renters and working class renters often move around a lot, will miss mailers that are often addressed to the landowner, not the tenant, right? Right. So if you're a renter, it's really hard to keep up and stay engaged with what's happening, say with a rezoning on your block or a street change on your block. Knocking doors is a great way to do that. Sending people out in the community to knock and say, hello, you know, we're from the city of Raleigh. There's a change coming. We'd like to talk with you. And for me, that should be a goal the city has is before these things happen, we have to do X, Y, and Z. And talking to a resident face-to-face, for me, would be a great goal. And there's a number of ways to do that. So that's one thing. That's one strategy I'd like to see the city move towards. And it's, again, it's something I've talked about at Planning Commission. particularly with big changes like the bus rapid transit,
Mm.
Transit overlay districts that will, you know, if we don't implement correctly, do stand to be huge engines of displacement and just gentrification for working class people. So yeah, and I think you can really extrapolate that out to any department of the city. It doesn't have to just be planning and housing. It can be like that with parks. It can be like that with, you know, I'll lift up the recent South Street closure, which
Right.
council just approved the comp plan amendment for that last night. And stop me if I'm jumping ahead, if that's a question you want to
No,
ask.
man, this is your platform. Please share what you need to share.
Yeah, I think, you know, there's been a lot of confusion around the Red Hat Amphitheater and the South Street closure. And I see that as a prime example of a place where confusion could have been avoided if A, the city had stuck to its normal processes, and then B, if the city had proper citizen engagement channels. Normally, and you probably know this, Robert, but for your viewers, normally when something like a street closure would happen, what the city would do is do a comprehensive plan amendment. And a comprehensive plan is our city's master document. It's not necessarily a law. It's just a plan to say, here's a guide for what we want to do as a city. And we spend a lot of time, a lot of money writing it as a city. And it's got indicators of diversity, equity, transit connectivity, housing affordability, all these things that we can choose to stick to or not stick to. So normally a comprehensive plan amendment is what the city would try to pass before it did something like close a street, because that's how you evaluate what the outcomes will be after you close the street. Now, for some reason, unbeknownst to, I think, everyone on the Planning Commission, certainly unbeknownst to me, the city decided to not do a comprehensive plan amendment before voting to close South Street with this case. I have no idea why. I think the only people that can make that decision are probably the city manager and or mayor. But for whatever reason, it did happen. That created a lot of confusion, and it still, to this day, which today is October 15th, I believe, October 16th. We're still seeing misinformation in local press about that, because I think people are generally confused about why it happened in that order. So I do want to point that out. Planning Commission heard a comp plan amendment about 3 weeks ago, which we would always hear the amendment before the council would get it. However, when we received it, council had already voted to close the street. Now just think about that. How could that ever make sense? Why would you move to close a street to take an action before you'd evaluated it through the document that we've set many millions of dollars aside to over the decades to use to evaluate things? It makes really no sense. So I think that's a prime example of the city kind of trying to take a shortcut and circumvent proper citizen engagement, whether that's through hearing from people at public comments, which you can do at Planning Commission, hearing from your volunteer planning commissioners, and even hearing from our paid planning staffers, right? So the planning staff is who gets to evaluate the comp plan amendment. And when they evaluated it, they found it to be inconsistent with 5 areas of our comp plan, which is a lot.
Well, Mr. Peter, let me interrupt if I may, because what happened with Red Hat was particularly troubling to me, and it still weighs heavy on my heart, because not only did somebody in the city government apparently try to circumvent the standard operating procedures, not only did they fail to provide true citizen engagement, their process pitted citizen residents against citizen business owners, and they had this head-to-head aggravation that was totally unnecessary if they had simply followed the rules and regs and done it properly. Yeah,
I agree. I agree, and it's tough to see that, right? Because small business owners downtown are really the lifeblood of our downtown, right? And it did pit a lot of them against local residents, and that's the opposite of the atmosphere we should be fostering. Right. We should have local residents that live near downtown should be the ones that frequent and are the closest with those local small business owners. And if we're to have a successful city, we need those things being one and one. And it was ugly to see a lot of that. Again, if we'd gone through the proper processes in the proper order, with the comp plan coming first, the public engagement coming first. And by the way, to my knowledge, no one on commission or council even knew that closing South Street was something on the docket until late May of this year.
Right.
We've known that the convention center wanted to expand for over a decade. So how that even came into play this late, I don't know. But again, that's out of my pay bracket, as they say. But I do think you bring up a great point, and we have seen a thing where local small business owners, particularly downtown, they obviously really want an amphitheater downtown.
I think we all do.
Let's be clear, so do I. I love going to that amphitheater. I've been going to that amphitheater for 12 years or so now. I love going to shows there.
Of course, it's fantastic.
We do need an amphitheater downtown, and I fully support that. I got a lot of messages online being like, why did you vote against the comp plan amendment? Do you not support Red Hat? And I said, no, I fully support Red Hat Amphitheater. We can have an amphitheater downtown without closing the street. That was an option the city council and the staff did not explore. We only explored closing the street and that one design. And if we'd had the proper time to go through those channels of engagement, we would have been able to come to that conclusion as a city. But I do think it's really important to listen to our comp plan. I think it's really important to listen to our planning staff who work really hard to evaluate these things. And it's important to use the processes we lay down. And if we do, we'll succeed. But if we take shortcuts, we will pay for them in the future as a city.
Well, Mr. Peeler, in our very last few minutes together, I would like to bring up one more thing. I truly believe if you want to see behind the mask or the public persona of a candidate, you follow the money. Who is funding their campaigns? And one of your opponents, the same one that voted to cancel the CACs in 2020, has in their tenure on the council taken big developer money, specifically from Kane. And I would like to ask you where are your donations coming from, and what do you feel is important from your donors?
It's a great question. I love talking about campaign finance. You're probably going to have to cut me off on this answer. This is an issue I'm really passionate about. And when I started running, back in April of this year, I made it clear that I'm not going to take corporate real estate money, whether that's through PACs, whether it's through developers, and that goes for any kind of PAC, whether it's the realtors, home builders, Triangle Apartment Association, the landlord PAC. There's several others in the area, and there's some nationally and statewide that do a lot of lobbying of our elected officials. Then there's, of course, local real estate attorney groups and developer groups that spend a lot because obviously they want their clients to make the most profit. That's what they're in business for. So it makes perfect sense that they would work for that. And that's not, illogical or revelatory or anything, but it is important because North Carolina has a $6,400 individual donation max. You can also, if you're married, you and your spouse can also give that. So you can give $12,800 per household. And we see big money flow into our local races, big money. Those PACs, particularly the home builders, they, I believe, gave $4,000 of PAC money to each of my incumbent opponents this year. One of my opponents received almost $39,000 from one of our local developers here.
Wow.
And I don't think there's anyone out there that would argue that money like that does not influence people's decisions. It obviously does. And long-term, Raleigh needs to be lobbying the General Assembly to have a local rule which cuts down our local max the way Carborough and Chapel Hill do. Theirs are in the $300 to $400 range. Most big cities or even medium-sized cities around the country have that rule. I think Austin, Texas limits it to $400 or so. Seattle, Portland, many others do this. So that's something we need to look into doing here. And some of our local neighbors already have that and have had that for decades. Again, I want to say, if someone gives you money to run a campaign, you are going to make decisions that benefit those people. Now, those people can be real grassroots donations, small dollar amounts, or they can be huge max outs. My campaign, as of October 16th, I believe we're at about $28,000. Nothing remarkable, but it's enough to run a campaign on. We have over 200 unique donors, which I'm really proud of. We have the second most unique donors in our race of 6 people. So we have a lot of people giving to us, and they're giving small amounts. I believe our average donation is $135, which I think between me and the 2 incumbents is the lowest. I'm really proud of that, right? We're not winning the race of the most money, but that's not why I'm doing this. And, you know, one of the things I want to be able to show alongside winning is that I have backing of common folks and lots of people. And I think we're well on our way to that by showing we're receiving grassroots money. One more thing I'll point out too, you know, look at ncsbe.gov. I would recommend anyone do that who's interested in municipal politics. Look at what your local electeds use to fund their candidacy. That's important, and it will tell you a lot about the decisions that are made at the council table. A lot of other cities kind of eat our lunch on that, on how they talk about public finance. We can do a lot more as a city. Long term, I'd love to see the city have a fund to help grassroots candidates run. A lot of cities do that, where say up to the first $10,000, for example, they would match you 3 to 1 to help you get your campaign off the ground. I think that's something I would love to see Raleigh look at. And I'd love to see us pay our counselors a living wage. I'd love to see us fund legislative aides for each of our counselors so they can push the policy that they want once they're in office. Legislative aides that report to them, not to the city manager, and many other things. But I think once you start talking about campaign finance, there's a lot of really cool reforms that make the city more democratic and would make it work better for working people as we go down the line.
Well, Mr. Peeler, let me just say, Raleigh, candidate Reeves Peeler's running for at-large. He would love for you to check him out on his website, social media. Please volunteer. He has an aggressive door-knocking, canvassing campaign, but more particularly, vote for Mr. Peeler. Take a friend, discuss it. Early voting starts tomorrow when we're filming this. Mr. Peeler, what is your social media or website URL? How do we reach you?
Yeah, reevesforraleigh.com is my website. So please go over there. Join our mailing list. You know, beyond the election, we'll be doing all kinds of updates and informative write-ups on there. We'll be sharing pictures from the campaign, talking about what we're doing next. And then at Reeves for Raleigh on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. Please follow those. Also, y'all, follow your backyard Raleigh. Robert here. There's all kinds of good content, really informative stuff, and good interviews that come on YBY. So give Robert a follow and a like and all that good stuff. But yes, also reevesforraleigh.com, and pretty much all those channels. It can be 4 as in FOR or the number 4. Both should work for most of them. So
Raleigh, Reeves Peeler needs your time, needs your vote, needs your attention. And we would be well served to have him on the Raleigh City Council. Mr. Peeler, thank you for your time. Raleigh, we'll see you soon. Have a great one.